How can it be that the USA 2003 invasion of Iraq in 2003 won 5 months long and Russian intervention in Ukraine so long? After 5 years we cannot see the end of this conflict. The reason for this lies in the strategies of the USA and Russia. The U.S. strategy in wars and interventions focuses on engaging in quick conflicts with smaller enemies who are unable to resist the large military forces of the U.S. or NATO. This approach emerged as a consequence of the Vietnam War, from which the U.S. barely managed to extricate itself. The Vietnamese forces were then large, determined, and prepared for a prolonged and exhausting conflict. Additionally, during the 1970s, they received significant support from the USSR, enabling them to sustain such a war. After Vietnam, the U.S. was determined to avoid long and draining wars against adversaries capable of causing substantial problems. Each conflict is meticulously planned to exhaust the enemy until they are incapable of effective resistance. For example, prior to the invasion of Iraq, the U.S. imposed 12 years of crippling sanctions to weaken Iraq's military to the point of collapse. Consequently, the U.S. is hesitant to confront North Korea, as the potential losses could be too great despite decades of sanctions. The U.S. political leadership strategy has resulted in a military posture where the U.S. and NATO forces are successful primarily against weaker and technologically inferior opponents. On the other hand, the Russian military inherited the Soviet Union's strategy, which was based on the capability for prolonged engagements. Since the collapse of the USSR, this strategy has been partially adapted. The Russian military is now equipped to participate in both swift conflicts and longer-term engagements. They possess small units for swift conflicts that are ready for intervention in any part of the world. Additionally, from a technological standpoint, the Russian military has advanced significantly, enabling it to meet the demands of modern warfare. This advancement allowed the Russian military to respond rapidly to the challenge in Georgia during the 2008 Beijing Olympics. For Russia, it is crucial to have sufficient equipment for conducting prolonged conflicts, to be able to produce ammunition, and to maintain a sufficient number of troops and a stable government that will not falter during exhaustive engagements. Since 2014 and the onset of the civil conflict in Ukraine, the Russian Federation has been preparing for such confrontations. That year, the first sanctions were imposed on Russia, prompting the country to turn to its own economy. The scale of the Russian economy and its global position mean that the sanctions from the U.S. and its allies have not been able to break it. This implies that in the case of a U.S. invasion, major conflicts could last up to 3 to 6 months. Conversely, in the event of a Russian invasion, the duration of the conflict would be significantly longer and would depend on the internal stability of the Russian Federation and the leadership's willingness to conduct the war. Therefore, no one can predict with certainty how long the war will continue.